7:30, we are watching for potential indictment to drop against former President Donald Trump. And to catch you up on this, it has nothing to do with the January 6th riot and denial of the 2020 election results. We want to bring in criminal defense attorney and friend of the show, A. Scott Bolden, to walk us through what it is about and what we are waiting on. Good morning to you, Scott. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning.
All right, so we mentioned there what it's not about. What's the focus here in this case?
Well, the focus here in this case is whether the hush money paid to Stormy Daniels, the $130,000, how it was booked on Trump's books. Remember, the company, as well as the CFO, have been not only indicted but convicted and charged already. A lot of this information is probably coming from that investigation and those convictions. And so if it was booked on the company books inappropriately, as let's say as a legal fee, as opposed to a hush money payoff, that's a misdemeanor. You get to a felony in New York if it was done in furtherance of a federal or state crime or any crime, if you will. And most of the legal observers believe that the grand jury is not really there for misdemeanors, but felonies. And so they believe that there's going to be a charge of a felony because this was done in furtherance of another crime. But there could be other charges such as racketeering, conspiracy. All of this is under the secrecy of the grand jury and the grand jury judge. And so we'll have to see whether he's indicted today or whether the indictment is released today publicly or tomorrow or sometime this week. Only Donald Trump is the one that says when it's going to happen, and the government hasn't said a word about it.
Okay, that leads me to a few questions here. The first one is, this happened several years ago, so why has it taken so long, and what role does the statute of limitations play here?
Well, it does play a role, but there are lots of ways to get around that statute of limitation. You can have an ongoing conspiracy, if you will, or an ongoing criminal enterprise. And as a result, it's kind of easy to get around the statute of limitations. Also, it becomes when you find, and some parts, it becomes when you find out about the criminal conduct, when you start to investigate. And so I don't think the statute of limitations, even though the defense may try to make that argument in subsequent motions filed before the court, that dog's not going to hunt.
So I'm curious, how strong of a case do they have here, specifically against Donald Trump? I know you mentioned some other defendants, but how strong is the case against him? I know he's accused those involved running this investigation of having some political bias, saying this is part of a larger conspiracy. Is there at least any reason for maybe his supporters to think that there's something to do with that?
There's never a reason for his supporters to think there's anything to that because they're only based on what Donald Trump tells them. But the reality is politics doesn't work inside the courtroom. That's the first thing. Second of all, I'm prognosticating as to the strength of the case because the only thing we know is what's been publicly told to us or shared with the media. But let me say this. The altering of the business records, I don't think that's a hard case. Making it a felony may be a tougher leap, because if he violated campaign finance laws, whether it was in New York or the federal, he was in a federal election. And so I'm not sure how they make a felony stick. But again, we're operating on limited information, if you will. But the fact of the matter is that if he's indicted, he will be the first former president to be indicted by the New York Manhattan District Attorney's Office. I'm a former ADA at that office. They will be fearless in their pursuit of justice. They will be thorough. And remember, there's another case pending in Atlanta that is even stronger against him in regard to January 6th and his denial of whether he won or lost the race, seeking to change votes and seeking corruption in regard to the results of that 2020 election.
You touched on this briefly, just the precedence of all of this. We're talking about the former president of the United States. I wonder, obviously, a crime is a crime, an alleged crime is an alleged crime. Do you do, though, anything differently when you're dealing with this kind of defendant?
Oh, absolutely. You've got to cross your T's and dot your I's twice, not once. You want to make sure you're right because you do not want to be embarrassed. The fact that he's a presidential candidate this early doesn't really mean much in regard to whether you prosecute him or not. And there's no law against prosecuting at the state level a president or a former president, but it just doesn't happen, if you will. The political odds of it happening aren't very high, but the political ramifications of it touch all aspects of the voting population, but also government and really the history of this country. That being said, that doesn't mean he's not going to be indicted or convicted because Donald Trump is like no other president we've had. He's accused of several bad acts whether they're criminal or not, over the course of his lifetime. And so that makes him very different. That makes him unique. And so that makes the prosecution of him at the state level very unique. But it's very doable. Doesn't mean you can't do it.
All right, we got about 10 seconds here. Just so that folks, just the takeaway here, what can we expect today or this week, or what at least are you looking out for?
Well, when it happens, when the indictment is released publicly, if the judge allows the court to do that or allows the prosecutors to do that, I'm looking for what's in the indictment, whether it's one or two charges or several charges that will mean that this was a much more serious investigation.
All right. Well, this is obviously happening kind of in the justice arena. We know it's sparking much larger political discussions, so we'll be tracking both of those. Certainly appreciate your expertise on this matter.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.